Good evening. Welcome to our Good Friday service. I wanted to introduce our service to you so that you have some idea of what to be prepared for. In Psalm 23, as most of you probably know, there's a phrase used as David is giving the poem. And the phrase is pretty well known to all of us. And it is the valley, the shadow of darkness, or the darkest valley. You pick your favorite. There's some poetry, of course, to the older English version that we find in King James. And the valley of darkness is where we are. And I don't say that lightly. When we come to a Good Friday service, we are aware, perhaps painfully aware, that we are standing in the shadow of a dark, dark moment. Both Chloe and I had a teacher, a good friend of Wes's, who used to say a rather fun phrase. And the reality is he might have borrowed it from some book. He did read a lot between hiking and getting lost in bear caves. And one of his favorite expressions, which I use just like he did, is holy imagineering. You see, when you study the Bible, you attempt, or at least most of us, try to step into it to understand not just the words on the page, but the context it comes from. In this case, first century Judea. We try to think about, okay, what would it have been like to be there in that place? What were the people like? What was it like to be a Roman-occupied region? And we do our best, with the information that we have, being 2,000 years later, to fill in the gaps. But with that, sometimes we lose the lives of the people that were there. I had another professor in graduate school who used to say, when you read Scripture, you're reading ink and paper. But before it was ink and paper, it was blood. It was human beings walking around and living. And if you read Scripture well, you give the pages blood once again, by which I mean you bring it to life. And so today, for our Good Friday service, we are holy imagineering together. There will be 3 stories told. Now, these are going to be told through the eyes of people that you probably haven't thought much about. And if you have, well, congratulations to you. These 3 characters are going to walk us through 3 sections of that last night. Because it is Good Friday, we are focused on these 3 events: the garden, the courtyard, and the cross. In those 3 events, we will walk through together as we hear the words said that we might imagine the people that lived these moments would have said. And so I'm inviting you to join us in that. And so our first sequence, as I said, is in the garden. Now, we're probably, if we're followers of Jesus and have been for a while, aware of the olive grove that was just on the eastern side of town. So you can see the temple in the distance, but the olive grove sits on a hill which is actually slightly taller than the mount that the temple sits on. A garden. A garden. Where else in the Bible is there a garden? A garden? Yes, there is another garden. And in this garden, a man is wrestling. He's wrestling with doing what God asks him to do. I feel like that other garden had a similar story, didn't it? But this man, unlike that first one, he says a phrase which we can all kind of hold. And the phrase is, not my will, but your will be done. God's will be done. That is different. And in that garden, another man approaches. No, we're not talking about that man, although he's approaching too. No, this man is a slave. Well, maybe he should tell you rather than me.
I am Malchus. I've heard stories about myself. Does that sound strange? It certainly sounds strange to me. Even now, years after the fact, people say my name in gatherings and tell stories of that day. I blame John. Were it not for him, I might have been able to forget this moment, call it a dream or a nightmare. But the truth is, I can no longer ignore what happened because the story is out and even I am running to catch up to it. The first thing you need to know is that I am a slave. I'm not a soldier. I'm not a Roman. I'm a slave, a Jewish slave. What else could I be? I mean, do you think that a goyim, a Gentile, could serve in the house of the high priest? No. I'm a Jewish slave, and I serve the leader of the temple in Jerusalem. You may know his name. It's Caiaphas. Serving the high priest does come with some perks, but mostly a lot of dirty deeds. And that night was no different. I was sent with the guards and the traitor to witness the arrest of Jesus of Nazareth. Yes, I knew who he was. I mean, only a person living under a rock wouldn't have heard of him. Jesus' name was in my master's mouth night and day for months, even a year. On that night, my master was gleeful to finally bring down the man who called him a viper and who had overturned tables in the court of the Gentiles. Caiaphas had finally succeeded in getting one of the followers of Jesus to turn on him. So he sent me and my cousin to follow the temple guards and the Roman soldiers to arrest the man in the Olive Garden. Again, I say that it was not a pleasant task to go out in the dark and find a man known to be a doer of signs and wonders, but we all know that Caiaphas wasn't going to trek down there himself. We arrived at the top of the hill under cover of darkness. Perhaps that's why we weren't noticed until we were close to the grove of trees. I guess the only other explanation is that they were asleep, but they wouldn't have done that. Either way, it was plain that we surprised them. The traitor Judas stepped out in front of our company and kissed the man that we had all seen preaching throughout Jerusalem for the last 3 years. Suddenly there was yelling, and I heard this sound, this terrible sound. The cold metallic ring as a blade left its scabbard, and I heard a whoosh, and suddenly I felt a white-hot pain radiating out from the side of my head. I reached up with my hand to the place where the pain came from, and I felt a warm, wet trickle where my ear had been. I fell down in shock, and I looked up at the man holding the blade as I firmly held my hand to my head. It was one of the followers of the rabbi. I think his name was Simon, but let's be honest, I feel like every one of them was either a Simon or a James. The story I have heard is that he was called the Rock by the rabbi. And I'll be honest, I say that I've never wanted to crush a rock more than I did in that moment. My consolation is that my cousin made Simon deny the rabbi before dawn. I must be honest, I didn't hear the words that Jesus said then. After all, my ear was lying on the ground in front of me next to the rock. All that I could hear was the sound of blood pumping in my head, and around me swords were present. The temple guards were armed, the Roman soldiers had gladiuses poised to strike, and my cousin was next to me with a look of pure terror on his face as he looked up at the rabbi and his student. I have no idea how Jesus calmed the armed men enough to do what he did next, but he looked around, he spoke something to my attacker, something else to the men around me, and he reached down and grabbed my ear. I felt sick looking at it, just lying there on the ground. It was just seconds ago that it was attached to my head, and now that strange piece of flesh was in the hand of a rabbi. I can tell you that Caiaphas would never have done that. he would have never picked it up. That thing was covered in my blood, and my stomach was churning. There was no way that I was attending the Passover this year. I was unclean. Then I felt his hand upon my head, and I can't even tell you what I felt, but all of a sudden I could hear. 2 phrases stick in my head from those words. One was, those who live by the sword die by the sword. That seemed to make the rock shudder and lose his nerve. The second thing I remember him saying was, all this had taken place so that the scriptures of the prophets may be fulfilled. Just like that, his followers melted into the dark. They fled so fast that the guards and the soldiers couldn't even move fast enough to keep up with them. But they didn't need to. They had their prize. The man everyone wanted caught, Jesus of Nazareth. He was bound and led to my master's father-in-law, and I was there. I bear witness. The rest, as they say, is history. I don't know how my ear was healed, and I have no idea how it could fulfill the scriptures and the prophets. But I do know this. I may be a slave to the high priest, but I owe my allegiance to the Rabbi Jesus. John knows me, and so he wrote my name in his account for all the followers of the Messiah. I am Malchus. I am a follower of Jesus. I'm a follower of the way.
Who is this that comes amidst the shadows in the night? Swords and spears and one man's kiss, the weapons at their side. His words are empty, his lips no more. Do what you have come for. Why do you march on him as though you have met your match? 12 legions wait upon him, but his father holds them back. Choose wise the side you take up in this war, but do what you have come for. For this is your hour, this is the reign of darkness unmentioned, of darkness untamed. His name as though he is some thief you long to see. His answer short but shakes the air and drags you to your knees. He stood in the temple, he lived upon its floor. So do what you have come for. For this is your hour, this is the reign of darkness unmentioned, of darkness untamed. So over and over his mercies can come to fly the banner high and victorious.
But the trick of it is that blasphemy only really works as a charge if he's lying. The irony is that the true blasphemy is not in the mouth of Jesus, but in the mouth of his accusers. The disciples are spread, and I cannot imagine what they wondered in that time. We have no real sense of where most of them went, except maybe two. And it's those two that we follow briefly in these gospel accounts. For tonight's sake, we've been pulling mostly from the Gospel of Luke in the 22nd chapter. Our first act, as I told you, took place in a garden. The second act takes place in a courtyard. Ironically, it's a courtyard of a courtroom. But in this courtyard, someone else has something to say. Well, let us hear her words.
I have always had a rebellious spirit. Perhaps that's why my mother named me Miriam, the rebellious one, or bitter ocean. Names have deep significance in my culture. Adonai has changed the names of some of our forefathers and mothers to mark a new covenant, a new identity or purpose. I sometimes wish that I had a different name, but considering some of the things I've done, Ocean of Bitterness seems to fit pretty well. As a child, I hung on to every word read in the temple. My favorite stories were the ones where Adonai would show up in mighty ways, like Elijah with the prophets of Baal. As a child, I'd sit on the ground and stack a pile of sticks on top of one another, and I'd pray as hard as I could, believing that Adonai would send fire down and light them aflame. But it never happened. I'm not sure why he sends fire for some and is silent for others. What I did know was that I was eager to see his justice rain down again. Living and working in Jerusalem during the Roman occupation, I can tell you that I prayed for Adonai to send down fire more than once. I had dreams of being a priest or enforcing the law of Moses and putting those Roman dogs in their place. Of course, I was born female, so any position in law or teaching was impossible. I was, however, familiar with the laws and rituals as I served with my brother in the house of the high priest Caiaphas. For years now, my master has been eager to bring Jesus the Nazarene to justice. This blasphemer claimed to be the son of Adonai. He performed healings on the Sabbath. And while I was mortified at his perceived lawlessness, I must confess I was very interested in him. Perhaps it was his rebelliousness that drew me in. I mean, he called the Pharisees a brood of vipers. Talk about bold. And he ate with sinners and tax collectors. He even invited women to follow him. Sometimes, when Jesus was rumored to be in town, I'd finish my chores early and sneak out through the courtyard and into the streets to try to see him. But I never made it in time. In fact, I never even saw him in person, not until the first week of Passover, or during that week of Passover. It would have been hard to miss him, a grown man riding the foal of a donkey down the streets of Jerusalem. The people were shouting out, "Hosanna, Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." And I didn't know whether to roll my eyes or to join in their praises. I studied his face. He didn't look like a king. He looked like what he was, a carpenter from Nazareth. His followers weren't that impressive either. One of them, the one closest to him, looked nervous, like he was protective of his rabbi, and unsure of the attention that he was getting. My brother told me his name used to be Simon, but Jesus changed it to Peter. So this Jesus thought he had Adonai's authority to change names too? The next few days were a bit of a blur. It's always stressful leading up to Passover. My chores are doubled, and Caiaphas was on edge more than usual because of this blasphemer. My brother and cousin told me that one of the disciples had come to the priests to betray Jesus, that there was a plan to arrest him that night. I wasn't sure how to feel. No one should claim to be the Messiah and get away with it. But I saw this man, and he didn't seem like the one to overthrow anything. None of us slept that night. We all waited for the party to return. It was cold. Finally, we heard footsteps and the clanging of chains. They had already gone to the house of Annas, the former high priest, and now come to the house of Caiaphas. I saw the man in chains. He looked sorrowful and resolute. I looked for my brother and cousin. I saw Malchus, my cousin. The side of his face was covered in blood. My eyes met my brother's, and he shook his head quickly as if to say, "Don't ask questions. Not yet." I stood frozen near the courtyard. I wondered where Jesus' followers were. I wondered what was happening behind those doors. Being a woman, I couldn't witness the hearing. I felt myself begin to shiver. I noticed the fire had not been lit in the courtyard. Amidst all the chaos, someone must have forgotten to light it. I gathered the kindling and flint. As I stacked the sticks, I recalled my old game, asking Adonai to send down fire, to reveal himself. I struck the flint, and a few others gathered around to get warm, whispering about the night's events. As the fire kindled, I looked at the man sitting across from me. He was the disciple of Jesus, the one who looked protective of him. The words left my mouth before I could think. "This man was with him," I said. To this day, I regret that. The shame I feel, a sea of bitterness indeed. The chattering went silent, and all eyes fell on him. His eyes widened and his brow glistened. Shaking his head, he said, "Woman, I don't know him." "I don't know him," he said. I couldn't believe my ears. I knew he was a follower. I saw him that day as Jesus rode into the city, and here he is denying his rabbi and friend. The people began to mutter to themselves, and the man slipped away. I sat in disbelief. If Adonai really did reveal himself, could it truly be in this humble carpenter? And if so, how could his closest followers betray him? I wasn't aware of it at the time, but I wasn't the only one who recognized the disciple. 2 others identified him as well in the hours that passed, and both times he denied it. Far off in the distance, I heard a rooster crow, while typically the harbinger of dawn, this crow, echoing in the streets of Jerusalem, seemed to beckon the falling of a great darkness.
Day of evil's triumph over virtue. On this day the good is called the vile. treated as a wolf, this gentle shepherd. Foulest envy does the good defile. Day of falsity, lies and pretension. On this day is truth's bent body killed. When high priest and judge both fail the true one, foulest cup of Satan's lies is swilled. Day of shadows, blood and tears and sorrow. On this day is beauty torn asunder. Glory marred with whips and thorns and nails. Foulest darkness covers beauty's wonder. Purest Jesus, you held us to the end. Truest Jesus, you taught us to the end. Strongest Jesus, you bore us to the Dearest Jesus, you loved us to the end. Dearest Jesus, you loved us to the end.
A great darkness indeed. In the Exodus story, as the people of Israel traveled through the wilderness, God would travel in front of them, by day as a cloud, and by night as a pillar of fire. But what happens when God stops leading? what happens when the darkness has no pillar of fire. I have no doubt that Peter was wondering that very same thing. As the rooster crowed, he could only have felt the absence of the one who he had followed for so long. So the sun came up on that Friday, and Jesus went on from the house of Caiaphas to other trials in other places, but most notably to Pilate himself. We sometimes give Pilate a pass, as though he didn't really have a part to play in this story. But Pilate hated the Jews around him, and he did everything in his power to mock and deride and hurt and harm and kill wherever he saw opportunity to do so. It is a well-known historical fact that even his own people thought he was cruel. And to be cruel in the Roman Empire is an accomplishment indeed. And so, after the trial, mockery though it was, Jesus was placed in a purple robe, had a crown of thick and deep thorns placed upon his head, and was whipped in full view of everyone. And when that was not enough, he was placed at the front of a procession of people with a cross upon his back, and the words "King of the Jews" were on a placard nailed to the top of it. That walk is unimaginable. But someone was there. Let's hear his story.
Good Jewish boy imagines how he will be used by Adonai when he grows up. A bold but gracious rebel like Daniel. A prophet like Elijah. A great king and leader in battle like David. Battle. Is that what makes a man great? I always thought so. Until today. My sons had made their journey with me to Jerusalem for this Passover. This was a rite of passage, and something all Jews, men and women, young and old, hope to do at least once in their lifetime. Jerusalem, our great city with its large stones serving as massive reminders of our great and holy God and the promise he has kept for his people, he never ceases to amaze me. I hope that always will be true. My boys, Alexander and Rufus, had made the month-long journey with me from the land of our home in Cyrene. They had made it with me, and the day of the holy festival had finally arrived, and we were walking toward the great gates, recounting our journey. Alexander's favorite part were the pyramids. We retold the stories of our forefathers' deliverance from Egypt and the miracles they witnessed, and Rufus questioned how our people could forget so quickly after all the miracles God had done for them. Children ask such great questions, don't they? It is that deliverance we were there to celebrate that day, remembering our incredible God who had done great and mighty things. The sun was as hot as ever as we trekked into town. It seemed like such an ordinary day, doesn't it? Doesn't it always seem to begin so? And we drew closer to the city, Our sounds and excitement and celebration grew silent. But the tension grew louder. Anger, weeping, and a repeated phrase I shall never forget: crucify him.
Crucify him! Crucify!
I was frightened by their anger and ashamed, for I recognized some of those voices. But I remained steady for my boys. From the murmurs around me, I heard the Romans were crucifying 3 criminals. Today? The Romans were cruel and relentless, merciless. They hated the Jews, and we weren't fond of them either. A voice carried 2 rebels and a teacher from Galilee, a man named Jesus. I had heard his name. I had heard a great many things about him, in fact, miraculous things. I was curious and lingered a bit too long. Suddenly, the crowd was parting right before me. The shuffle of the pilgrims around me left me momentarily confused, and before I knew it, my boys and I were at the front of the crowd. And I saw him, bruised and bloodied, crushed, barely human. My heart broke at the sight of his burden. Rufus grasped and grabbed my cloak, eyes frozen. "Look away, boys. Show the man mercy," I said. Alexander stepped behind me, burying his face in my robe. Rufus turned his eyes to the ground. My eyes, however, caught Jesus' gaze, so sorrowful and somehow kind beneath all that swelling. I could see it. And then he fell. In an instinct, by instinct, I reached out toward him as his cross scraped on his shoulder, and my hand stopped. If I touched him, I would be ritually unclean, unable to celebrate Passover in Jerusalem with my boys. That moment of hesitation pains me to this day. Sometimes the right thing is not so easy. The soldiers yelled at him. Whips flailed so near I could feel the quick breeze on the hairs of my arms, and its crack penetrated my spirit. 1,000 thoughts flooded my mind. All of my sons, the memories I hoped we would make together, and the moments now that would sear in their dreams and fears. "You there, pick up the cross." I heard it, but it took a minute for me to realize the soldier was talking to me. The soldier came closer to me and then shoved me toward him. My eyes caught the man Jesus once more. His eyes were full of sorrow, this time for me, and I was undone. I picked up his cross. I carried it, its splinters digging into my back, droplets of his blood, dried blood, stuck to my cloak. The man sighed in relief. He pulled himself up and began putting one exhausted step in front of the other. The jeers of the crowd began again, and my boys trailed as close as they could, weeping, and I began to move my feet. I watched as the criminals before me mocked back at the crowds, but Jesus remained silent, taking each step, determined, resolved. Finally, we got to the hill, and the centurion pointed to where I was to put down the crossbeam. I laid it down and begged to leave, and as I turned to go, there stood Jesus with 2 soldiers behind him. They were about to nail him to that cross. Once again, his eyes were filled with sorrow, but I felt peace from him as well, a peace I still strive to understand. I looked for my sons and found them, tears streaming down their faces. "I'm so sorry, my boys. I will have to go through the ceremonial cleansing, and it is 7 days before I can enter the temple. We will miss the Passover for which we had traveled." Just then, the loud thunk of the cross falling into its place hit the earth, with Jesus nailed atop, echoing deep in my soul. I looked around, seeking God for answers. Amidst all the mockers, I saw a small group of mostly women and a man or two in the crowd near Jesus. They didn't mock. They wept. And their eyes shone with the same sorrow and kindness of this man Jesus. I nodded to my boys, and we made our way nearer to them. It felt somehow safer. And we began praying. The prayers of my children in that moment changed my life. They saw the man so clearly. They prayed that God would not turn his face away from him, but would somehow save him. My mind was honestly critical, more than I should have been, and suddenly I remembered the conversation we had through Egypt, and I prayed, Lord, do not let us forget. Help us remember how you have led us to this moment. That wasn't the journey I expected, or the memories I wanted to make with my boys. This was more powerful and more meaningful than that. My children were showing a real and deep faith that I hadn't experienced even yet. And then the man Jesus spoke, my God, why have you forsaken me? Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. This man who walked toward death, resolved with kindness in his eyes, he would forgive them. It is finished. And with that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. The women's weeping turned to wailing, and my own heart stopped. My sons fell to their knees almost in unison, both silent. And then the earth quaked violently, and the sky went dark, as though Adonai himself felt this deep anguish. And in that moment, I found my own resolve. Truly, this man was. He was the Son of God. Many things began happening in the days that followed. Incredible things. And one thing I know for sure, for some unknown reason, the God of the universe saw fit for me and my sons to not just bear witness to this, but to be a part of that, to be a part of one of the greatest and most terrible days in our faith. And I will forever pray that I never forget the mighty thing Abba had done and the life and the profound death of his only Son, my Savior. How deep the Father's love for us. So you better be watching and praying, because you never know. You never know when he might choose you, and when God chooses you, you can never be the same.
How deep the Father's love for us, how vast beyond all measure, that he should give his only Son to make a wretch his treasure. How great the pain of searing loss, the Father turns his face away, as wounds which mar the chosen one bring many sons to glory. Behold the man upon a cross, my sin upon his shoulders. Ashamed, I hear my mocking voice call out among the scoffers. It was my I know that it is finished. I will not boast in anything, no gifts, no power, no wisdom, but I will boast in Jesus Christ, his death and resurrection. Why should I gain from his reward? I cannot give an answer, but this I know with all my heart: his wounds have paid my ransom. Why should I gain from his reward? I cannot give an answer, but this I know with all my heart: his wounds have paid my ransom. But this I know with all my heart: his wounds have paid my ransom.
Ashamed, I hear my mocking voice call out among the scoffers. How strange it is to think of yelling those words: crucify him. I know that you have never said it, but then maybe you have. Maybe we all have. At that moment, the sky went dark. Physical darkness at 3 in the afternoon. Can you imagine? Darkness is the valley that he walked through. And as he left the world, he left his followers in that same darkness. Our story tonight ends in Luke chapter 23. We do not go on to chapter 24. What a difference the story makes if you stop here. We're not going to jump straight to the light just yet. This service will not quite take us to hallelujah, but ends here. We will sit in the darkness and leave this place feeling just a small portion of the darkness that the disciples and women must have felt for that entire Sabbath day. A day of sitting in sorrow and darkness. God did not keep his followers from that darkness. In fact, he did not keep his own son from that darkness. And if we go back to Psalm 23 or even further to Psalm 22, God did not keep his servant David from that darkness either. My God, why have you forsaken me? The opening words of Psalm 22. After this last song of our service, we will end. And yes, we know that that is uncomfortable. We know how the story ends, but let's sit in the dark for just a while. Let's do some holy imagineering. Let us remember that we mock our Savior too at times in our lives. And now just one question remains. Were you there?
crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble.